Hey, this is Bryan.
And Shelby.
And you're listening to the Hyperspace
PodBlast. Aren't you a little short for a podcast?
Huh?
Welcome to Hyperspace PodBlast number 21. Roger, Roger.
Amazing.
Hey,
With
not
us
really,
today,
but it's okay.
Classic B1 battle droid, everyone.
Well, I can't let you have all the fun, like making these
No, that's true.
funny voices.
And
You're
make
gonna
me laugh.
eventually run out.
I've run out a long time ago.
Maybe.
I'm way into the recycling. But anyway, episode 21, and we're talking about you can't judge a book by its Star Wars.
You're so clever.
I know. So the point here is, like, obviously Star Wars books, but we're going to start out by asking the question, why is it that these IPs that start out in one medium end up swelling into other mediums like Star Wars, Warcraft, Halo, Dungeons and Dragons? All these different things that are created for one space end up blossoming into other categories. Is it because there's a demand for more, or is it just the powers that be taking advantage of knowing the consumers will snatch it up no matter what?
Well, I mean, as someone who, I honestly thought that Star Wars books, when someone says like, oh, I read Star Wars books, I used to think, not being a Star Wars fan, I thought that meant just like an adaptation of the book, which I've never enjoyed those in relation to any other movie. I remember growing up and you'd see like a film adaptation of some random movie, and even the cover was just the movie poster, and I never had any interest in those. I had tried to read them and I thought they were just, I don't know, they fell flat. But then realizing that Star Wars books are so much more than that, granted, I've only read one, so much more. Granted, I've only read one, I can understand how it brings an element to getting to know these characters you really like in a different way, because there's a lot of stuff you just can't do on screen.
True, yeah, or at least not in any way that's comparable to like an action type movie that Star Wars is, you know what I mean? There are those in your head type drama movies, but that's not really equivalent to the Star Wars space. But that's what you get from a novel, is that inner monologue, that you just really don't get on film. You hit on something interesting though, in that I wonder if some of these things spawned from novelizations of films, etc. And then they realized that, oh, people will buy this. Maybe we could do more. Or if it was an actual demand for more content. Or if someone was just like, I have this idea for a story, and they were like, whatever, maybe it'll work, we'll see. But yeah, I agree with you when they make a novelization of a movie that's just a movie. Like, oftentimes movies come from novels, and that makes perfect sense. But when you do it the other way around, it's like, why?
But understanding that Star Wars is this huge galaxy to play in, I think when you get that concept, when you accept that as, some sort of truth, that you realize that these books do have a lot of meaning outside of, the movie, because it's its own thing. I could say that about, a lot of different IPs, because they're so huge, they're this sandbox. It makes sense that there are books that are somewhat related, but they give you more, because someone falls in love with that world is what sells that book and sells that story.
Yeah, I'd say that's actually like probably the bang on truth of it. It's just that the world building for whatever the IP, but especially for Star Wars. I mean, Star Wars galaxy is basically infinite at this point. But the same for anything else. That's why I think you're right. That's why these stories become, because you have this huge sandbox, and whatever it is like the one kid playing with a shovel in the corner. And you look behind him and there's all this, why not invite more kids to play type thing. That makes perfect sense. I am kind of curious now if it's like kind of like a which came first, the chicken or the egg type thing, about how novels became a thing. Because I think Splinter of the Mind's Eye was the first Star Wars novel not related directly to one of the film. I have to go do some research, see if I can figure that out. I don't know the answer. So now that we figured out that part,
See, you just close that book. Good job, us.
Yeah, I know. Now we know why these things exist. What do you think the purpose is? We touched on it somewhat, just playing in the universe, but bringing it in to Star Wars specifically, what, in your opinion, is the purpose of a Star Wars novel? You've just read Thrawn, right?
Yep, that's it.
So
In like the first page of Catalyst.
good job.
I know. I've been busy, okay?
I know it. But Thrawn, I think, has a much different purpose than, say, something like Heir to the Jedi that is directly related to at least one of the characters of the main saga, where Thrawn is very much indirectly, if related at all.
Well, to me, as someone who's only read Thrawn, it gives this ridiculous, amazing backstory to a character. We're watching Rebels season 3, so you don't, if that's your introduction to Thrawn, you don't know a lot about him. But what Thrawn the novel provides is all this character development that, I mean, you couldn't do. You just couldn't, from his thought process to the viewpoint of others, their opinions of him. If you told me that the Thrawn novelization is what every Star Wars book is like, I would read every single one. Because I like that. I mean, maybe that's just me, but I like getting the stuff that I just don't think could be done in a movie very well. If someone said that they wanted to make a Star Wars story based on the Thrawn novel, I'd be like, I don't know. I don't know how you could do that. I mean, I know how you could do that, but I don't think that you would...
How effective it would be. Yeah.
Exactly.
Doesn't really transfer.
What about you?
I think something interesting there is if you're introduced to Thrawn in Rebels, he's kind of a different person than you get if you know the full story, so to speak. Like in Rebels, he's used pretty sparingly, and he's very much a villain. Like he comes off as this evil, out to get you type person. But we know from the novel that's just not really the case. Like he's definitely a do what must be done type figure. Sort of ends justify the means, but he does in the novel, try to save lives, try to do things the most, what do I want to say? I can't think of the word. Anyway, yeah, so it's just, he's almost like two different characters. It's just that you don't see the other side of him in Rebels. So I can see where that one, the purpose there being that you actually get character development in a character that's just kind of there otherwise. But what about these novels that deal with something that's I'm getting kind of ho-hum about here in Star Wars is basically everything that's happening right now is happening in this tiny window between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. And we just talked about having this giant sandbox and how the movies are this one kid playing in the corner with a shovel. Well, now the rest of the expanded universe is like another kid playing right behind him.
Yeah.
It's like every once in a while they branch out, but they're really pigeonholing everything into this like tiny spot, which is I don't know if they're...
I think it's to try and not spoil anything, or I don't know if you'd say spoil, but to
leave the storytelling open for
the next episodic films.
Yeah, I suppose I get that, like, to a degree.
But it's very frustrating, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have all this time before the prequels, and then you have, Rogue One and Rebels play in that between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. And I guess the new Darth Vader comic does too. So they've kind of expanded more, but it's still, I mean, that's still not a very big part of that sandbox. And it's a little frustrating also that there are so many potential characters in this galaxy. And then we keep getting things with Han, Luke, and Leia.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people are really looking for original characters right now.
Absolutely.
I mean, at least I am.
Well, think of what you see on Twitter, like Twitter polls, when they did the Hasbro action figure thing. Who wins these things? It's Revan, it's Ahsoka, it's Aphra. These are not regular. I mean, shoot, Revan doesn't even exist anymore technically, and Aphra and Ahsoka are both EU characters. You know what I mean? Like, they're not film characters. So obviously people are latching on and gravitating toward these new characters. I don't see why they haven't really just run with that.
Yeah, it is perplexing, I think. I don't know why you wouldn't go for that. You could put something out in the middle of wild space very easily and play over there for a while.
And they did do that with the young adult, or it might even be like younger than young adult. It's, I don't know what grade range, but they have that wild space, and that does it's characters that they're having their own adventure in the same galaxy. You know what I mean?
Then you get into that some people feel that that's not quote unquote Star Wars. I think sometimes when people say it doesn't feel like Star Wars, it's because it doesn't have the characters they're familiar with. How do you think that you balance that? How do you balance that demand? Because sometimes people feel like if you go too far away, or if it has a different quote unquote feel.
Yeah, that's true. I think the way to combat that is just the way you play in the universe. In the example we were using for the wild space, that's a little more difficult because that's an area that you're not really familiar with. So it's hard to interject familiar like races, locations, etc. into the story because it's not really part of it. What they do is they interact with the Empire. So obviously there you have that sort of immediate Star Wars-y connection. I think as long as there's something that can connect the dots for you, you know what I mean? It's like that 6 degrees of separation type thing. As long as you can find the Star Wars close enough, then it would work. I mean, you couldn't do something really outlandish like, I don't know, I can't think of a good example.
Right.
Like Screaming Citadel, you can't do that. That's not Star Wars.
Whoa. Brian.
I know, I'm sorry.
I know.
I didn't like it.
You really, I mean, you're very vocal about not liking it.
That's true. But as far as novels are concerned, as far as not liking things, Heir to the Jedi, I thought really felt not Star Warsy the way they brought in the lady with her Vader protest song, just because it was at odds. I'm not trying to say there's not music in Star Wars, like obviously there would probably be protest songs about the Empire, but I don't think, in my mind, the fact that Vader is mostly prosthetic is not really common knowledge. So how did this person know this? Why did they write a song about it? It's just, I read that and I was just...
Also, songs don't really translate very well in books, in my opinion.
No, and I mean, all they did was talk about it existing. It's not
Okay.
like they tried to sing it or something. I don't think. If they did, I've blocked that out. But it took me out of it because I was like, why?
Mm-hmm.
This is such a strain.
Right. So what novels would you want to see?
I think for sure what we were talking about before, where you pick something that is Star Wars but isn't what we're used to, or like you said with Thrawn, a character that's sort of a fringe character that gets fleshed out. I think some of the books I've liked the most were the Tarkin novel, because really don't know much about Tarkin, so it was interesting to see his backstory and upbringing, where he kind of came from. I would like to know more about Dooku. I would like to know about Grievous before he became a mechanical. Like, that would be a good story. The story of Maul's upbringing. I know some of this stuff has been EU, and that's another kind of, like, I don't know.
Do you go back and redo it?
Yeah,
or...
exactly. Like, I feel like that's kind of this weird give and take they're in right now, because they're bringing so much EU stuff back, but then it's like, how much of this is a rehash versus, making it the same but different, or how much of it is trying too hard to make it different so it seems
new,
worth doing, and not just bringing the old stuff back into canon. Because technically right now, anything that happened before the prequels, or really during the Clone Wars, could probably still work, because nothing has been done to counter any of that. You know what I mean? Like, it worked in the universe before when we had the prequels in the Clone Wars series. So in theory, there's no reason it shouldn't still work. But, they just brought in that big swath. But they left the Son of Dathomir comic as canon, which I still can't figure out why they did that. Part of me thinks it's some weird contractual thing, has nothing to do with the story at all. But I don't know. Yeah, and I guess the Dark Disciple book that was mostly about Ventress, who I think I've mentioned before is a character I didn't really care for until I read that, and I was like, wow, okay, this is really good. So that was a surprise, and something like that I think I would enjoy. I was kind of hoping for that with Ahsoka's novel, but it kind of let me down. Yeah, it had potential.
See, I'm kind of different. Some of the stuff, I mean, I usually have kind of off-the-wall ideas about some of this stuff.
Yes, you do.
Yes, I do. And I'm about to do it again. I kind of want to see in-universe books, like a book that, say, someone we see on film could pick up and read themselves. So, Kind of like Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them.
Right, like fiction within the fictional universe.
Correct. Or guides and things like that. Maybe that's not a novelization, but that's a Star Wars book I'd want to see. I mean, sure, we have like the ultimate visual guides that we get, but I'd like to see something. And I mean, I know a lot of it's electronic in that world, but
Well, right, yeah.
some sort of printed database of the Empire's logs of alien species.
That would be cool, actually.
Because then you could also see what the Empire, writes down about them. They say weapons usually carried, personality traits, ways to disarm or whatever. Versus, or if you saw, the logs that maybe the Republic kept, which are more kind of informational. Like, say what they were trying to do with Thrawn, how they were required to go there and study.
Oh, yeah, trying to catalog him and all that.
Correct. So,
interesting.
I would like to see the results of that process in a book. So, I mean, maybe it's not, I know it's not a novelization, but it's a Star Wars book I would like to see. Or even a journal of people's accounts, kind of like World War Z.
Gotcha.
During the rebellion period.
Oh, that would be cool. Some more like the Civil War letters that you can read. Almost like informational texts.
Right. Well,
that become
a story kind of, because you piece it together by these different people's accounts in a certain order.
That would be pretty cool, actually.
I know,
right? That's kind of sort of what Twilight Company is, but it's just all basically from one group, and kind of all from the same perspective of one person. But that was actually a pretty good book too, a sleeper pick, if you will. Yeah, I guess.
So that's the kind of stuff I'd like to see, things that are a little outside the box, just because I find different people's perspectives interesting, and the best way to do that usually is in a book. Like, use the book as a powerful medium for things that don't translate well.
Yeah, I agree. I like the idea of using the books as books and not trying to do a book that feels like it could have been a Star Wars movie.
Correct.
Yeah, that makes good sense to me. And I know we're mostly trying to talk about books, but comic books are sort of books. We'll probably do another whole episode about comics separately, but I feel like they're doing a better job of staying in their lane, if that makes sense. Like, the comics come off as comic booky. Sometimes that's part of the rub on them, is they're too much like comic books and don't feel like Star Wars, which, I wholeheartedly agree with one thing. But on the other hand, yeah, book-wise, that's definitely something that I think they could look at and kind of make a conscious effort to be like, let's write books that are books about Star Wars, not write books that could be movies. That's a good point.
So how much impact do you think a novel could or should have on the greater Star Wars universe?
Yeah, see, this is something else I struggle with now with the new canon.
I don't even know. That was really bad.
I love it.
I'm just making it up as I go.
Yeah.
It just gets worse every single time.
I wasn't going to say worse, but it gets something every time. But yeah, like the old EU, I think this is part of what's tearing people different directions with this is, for so long, that's all there was. We didn't think we'd ever get any more films. So, large, impactful things happened. Like, Chewie died, The Solo kids were born, raised, and, at least one of them died. No, two of them, yeah. So, yeah, it was, really, big deal stuff went down in these books. And it was, earth-shattering, huge events. And pretty much everything that's happened in a new canon novel, I don't want to say is pointless, but it's inconsequential. There's little things happen. They're interesting. But if you've never read the books, you're not going to lose anything. And that's the whole point.
Right. Because, I mean, honestly, how can you truly expect things that wouldn't make, a book that makes a movie, you're missing something. You're missing a puzzle piece.
Yeah, exactly.
When it's these huge movies.
Yeah, this isn't a niche audience. I think sometimes Star Wars fans kind of forget. They go to Celebration and they think, okay, these are the only people that like Star Wars. But out there in the world, there's tons of people that really look forward to the next Star Wars movie and then don't care about Star Wars anymore until that next Star Wars movie.
And that doesn't make them any...
No, they're really into it, and they'll talk talk to you, they'll have in-depth conversations about things that happen in the movies, but that's their knowledge base, is just the movies. And you're right, that's absolutely fine.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why, and I think
personally, I don't think it's fair to bring some book in that completely changes the entire storyline in a way that you couldn't truly understand, as if you had missed a movie.
Right, yeah, exactly. Like like I said, I think that's sort of what's pulling, because the older EU fans are used to that, and you're just not going to get that now. I mean, it may come back eventually, but it's going to be a while before we get back to that kind of like real solid impact happening within a novel.
Within a novel, yeah. But, I mean, I think that you can still have a great impact, because think about, once again, using my only point of reference, it completely changes how I view Thrawn whenever I watch Rebels.
Right, but that's a good point. It makes an impact on something other than a film. You know what I mean? And that's why I think we have all this. When Benicio del Toro was cast, everyone's like, oh my God, he's going to be Thrawn. And, oh my God, so-and-so might be so-and-so out. That we took all these EU characters, we try to throw them in the movies, right?
Yeah.
And we're like, well, we would know who they were, but the general audience isn't going to know. And they're not going to take the time to explain, oh, this blue guy, you see, he was a real big deal back in the Empire. But then this happened, and this happened, and this happened.
See, I still think that Vanto is going to come back.
I think he is too, but I don't think it's going to happen in the film.
I do, but that's okay.
I would love it. I'm not saying that they shouldn't or that they won't. I'm just saying it's very unlikely. Unless, like with Vanto, they could introduce him as a new character.
Exactly. You introduce him as a new character, and everyone else is like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's like you have a little like secret, right?
It is. It's cool. It's like, I appreciate that because it's Easter eggs, essentially, in a way.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of like giving you the backstory first, which is sort of backward from what they normally do. You normally get introduced to the character, and then maybe they flood you with backstory later. This would be like front-loading the backstory, and then if you have read it, yay for you, you know it. Otherwise, you can figure out the character without it.
And I think it's okay to, I think that Disney and Lucasfilm can rise up to the challenge of creating stories that are impactful, but also don't leave you with not enough information to understand the movies, and to really get the full impact of the movie. I think it just increases it, and I think that, maybe they're still trying to figure that stuff out right now. I think we're in kind of a transition period of understanding how much they can do and what they can do to generate that feeling.
Yeah, I think you're right too. And I think a lot of this is going to explode after episode 9 comes out.
Oh yeah.
Because that's going to close some things, but then it's going to open like so many other doors. Cuz right now I think they're keeping a lot of things close to the vest cuz they don't really want to lean anyone too much toward what they're trying to do. Or if Rian Johnson is to be believed, they don't have the full story planned out yet, so they don't
want to do anything to contradict.
Yeah, they don't want to be the old EU where they put something out and then the next movie just totally kind of throws it on its head. So
is there a danger of filling all the gaps and leaving no room for interpretation?
I think yes. This is something that unmistakably Star Wars talked about recently.
The mystery.
I know, the mystery is gone. But I don't think they're ever going to do that. They fill in the little things for us. Like, they give the fans, they throw us a bone and it's got a little meat on it. But they're not going to be throwing out T-bones, or anything like that. They're giving us scraps, essentially, is what it is. There's always going to be, I think, the greater mystery, the big thing, are always going to be able to be debated. Look at the Force. With all the extra information we have about the Force, it didn't so much whittle it down as it made it even harder and broader and more.
I swear, the more we find out about Jedi and Sith, the more it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's one of those things where you close one door and open a bigger door.
Well, yeah, I think that, one, it's impossible to fill all those gaps. Think about the time span that we're talking about.
Yeah, and it would be so Like there would be no enjoyment about that from the creative process.
No.
There would be no. I mean, I'm sure there are some people out there that legitimately want to know and categorize and catalog everything, but there are very few of those, I think. I want to say most people like kind of having the ability to leave it up to interpretation.
Right. Well, I think that one of the things, you may know the what, but you don't know the how.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the interpretation. So I think not knowing things that actually come across in books very well, the how, the motivation, the reasoning, what's going on in someone's head, that's the stuff that you're usually getting in books that you're not seeing in movies. And I think novels can fill some of that stuff in if they want to, but it also can leave those little hints that there's something more here. I think that they're better at that. It's easier to write around and imply something than just show it on screen.
Yeah, kind of like Dave Filoni does all the time on Twitter.
And just like makes everything explode.
Yeah,
but
he says so much without saying anything at all.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people go crazy, and he really doesn't. He just says things we already know in a different way.
Yeah, and I think that is the beauty of what you possibly will see in the future in these Star Wars novels, is that it's going to make you think that things are more than you can see, and that it's more complex than we believe. Even if someone says, this is how this happened,
yeah,
and tells us.
Yeah, like Pablo was saying, canon is like the broader story, not the details. His example was Han and Greedo were both in the cantina. Han walked out, Greedo didn't.
Yeah.
Your eyewitness account from the inside, there's probably 30 stories, There's
it's like
probably
playing the telephone game.
Lone gunman on the grassy knoll in the back.
Yeah.
If you ask someone,
Exactly. So I think that we'll always have that. We'll always have the different interpretations, the different viewpoints. There's always going to be something, okay, yeah, that's what we think happened, but that's that person's perspective.
Right, exactly. And I think that's going to be one of the interesting things about this 40th anniversary.
A certain point of view?
Yeah, exactly. Because we're going to get the same stories, but from someone else's perspective. And that's going to be very interesting. They did sort of a similar thing with the guy. It was a short story, one of the Journey to the Force Awakens things. The little, can't remember his name, but carries around animals. But he tells us, it's like a retelling of the destruction of the Death Star from the point of view of like these animals. It's very interesting. It's like a neat take on it that obviously didn't happen, but still, it's a cool story for kids, and that wouldn't be a bad thing to have more of.
But that's all we have time for.
That's how you PodBlast, fool.
Yeah.
Bing bang, boom boom.
Pew pew.
So yeah, I mean, if you want to get involved in the conversation, at hyperspace_pod on Twitter, hyperspacepodblast@gmail.com, and the fresh new hyperspacepodblast.com.
What?
We're everywhere. Come and get us.
Yeah, make sure you hit us up on the social media. We like to talk to you, especially in GIFs.
Yeah, especially Shelby. She's
Especially
the GIF
me.
queen.
What?
That's what's up. So anyway, we out. Peace.
Bye.